We used to live on the upper level of a two-family house. My parents owned the house and rented out the bottom floor to different tenants over the years. In 2012, a new tenant moved in downstairs. He seemed quiet and was the type of tenant my parents preferred. However, a few days after he moved in, there were loud noises at all hours of the night. The front door would open and shut multiple times, and sometimes there would be loud talking or even yelling. One night, my dad went downstairs to investigate and asked the tenant to keep the noise down. This incident made my dad suspicious of the guy downstairs. Fast forward to Christmas Eve night when we had a big family gathering. Uncle Jake, who is a heavy smoker, went outside several times to smoke. After our main course, he accidentally left his phone on the table. When it started ringing, my dad told me to take it to him outside. I grabbed his flip phone and went downstairs. However, before going out the front door, I noticed that the back door was open. There's a small hallway with 3 doors when you enter the house, one leading to the downstairs apartment, the front door, and a hallway that goes to the back door. Assuming my uncle went out back, I headed towards the backyard to find him, but he wasn't there. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a noise coming from the shed. Surprisingly, the shed door was open. I called out for my uncle and someone emerged from the shed. It was too dark to see clearly, but I was fairly certain it was my uncle. He quickly approached me, and initially I thought it was because he needed to answer his phone promptly. However, as he came closer to the lights inside the house, I could finally see his face. To my surprise, it wasn't my uncle, but rather the tenant who lived downstairs. The way he was coming towards me made me feel uneasy, so I turned and ran towards the door. I slammed it shut in his face and went to the front yard where I found my Uncle Jake smoking. I stood beside him and explained what had happened with the downstairs tenant charging at me. My Uncle Jake is the type of person who doesn't take things I say seriously, or maybe he just avoids confrontations. I stayed with him until he finished smoking because I felt uncomfortable. Then we walked back upstairs together to join the rest of the family at the dinner table. I informed my dad about the tenant in the shed and how he followed me. There was a moment of silence at the table, and my dad seemed slightly concerned, but I suppose he didn't want to spoil the rest of our Christmas dinner. He waited until we finished eating to check outside. When he returned, he mentioned that the neighbor didn't answer the door, but the shed was closed. A couple of hours later, the rest of our family left, and my immediate family began preparing for bed. I stayed up in the living room by the fire and the Christmas tree because I enjoyed the cozy atmosphere they created. I watched a Christmas movie and must have dozed off at some point. However, I do recall abruptly waking up from a half-sleep and hearing a creaking sound on the stairs. I was too tired to move from my lying position, and I assumed it was either my mom, dad, or sister. I mentioned that our enormous Christmas tree obstructed my view of the stairs. Upstairs, all the floors were carpeted, so I couldn't hear whoever was moving around. However, I did hear a door open down the hall, most likely my sister going back to bed. The fire was almost out by now, and the movie I was watching had ended. The clock under the TV showed that it was 1 a.m. Since I was so comfortable, I decided to just stay on the couch. A few minutes later, I heard something rustling near the tree. It sounded like an ornament had fallen off. Someone had definitely bumped into it. I turned to my side and looked at the tree, but it was still and unchanged. I turned back to my other side, still wide awake, and saw a man standing over me, slightly bending. Naturally, my first reaction was to scream. My second reaction was to examine the face to see if it was my father. When I realized it wasn't my father, but rather the tenant downstairs, I screamed even louder. The man tried to cover my mouth, but I think he realized it was too late. Everyone heard me. He quickly ran for the stairs just as my dad burst out of his room. My dad chased after him, but the man was already driving away down the street. I believe that when he was standing over me, he was making sure I was asleep before attempting to rob the place or something. Luckily, my parents had copies of his ID and other important information, which they used to locate him and sue him for breaking and entering. We won the case easily. However, it doesn't change the fact that it was an incredibly terrifying experience to go through. It was Christmas Eve in 2015. I had recently started working as a psychiatric nurse, but I had to begin with overnight shifts, including Christmas Eve night, which fell on a Thursday. Technically, by the time I arrived at work, it was already Friday. Most of my shifts were slow and boring. with a lot of time spent sitting in front of a computer since the majority of patients were asleep during my shift. Occasionally, I had to check on patients and observe their behavior or deal with restless patients in the middle of the night. Initially, it was overwhelming to interact with so many people with mental disabilities at once, but the Christmas decorations throughout the building brought some extra cheer to the place. At night, the main lights and hallways would turn off, and dim lights would illuminate the area. These dim lights, combined with the Christmas lights hanging all over, created a more relaxed and comfortable atmosphere. There was one patient in particular who gave me the creeps. Her name was Abitha, an elderly and sickly lady with severe schizophrenia. She often mumbled incomprehensible things to herself and sometimes said things out loud that I thought were directed at me, but she was actually talking to herself. It was around 3 in the morning when I went to check on Abitha, who had been awake the entire night. I entered her room and asked if she needed anything, but she just stared at me with a terrifying smile and laughed. It sent shivers down my spine as if I were in a scary movie. She looked away from me and started muttering something. I couldn't understand most of it, but the words, "check the bathroom," stood out to me. I asked her to repeat herself, but she ignored me. She simply turned to her side and rested her head on the pillow. I tried to confirm if she wanted me to check the bathroom, but she refused to answer. I entered the bathroom across from her room, but found nothing unusual. Returning to my desk in the hall, I noticed the bathroom door across from me. Out of curiosity, I entered, but the lights didn't turn on. I listened by the doorway and heard breathing, followed by a click from one of the stalls. I grabbed a doorstopper and wedged it under the door to let in some light from the hall. From a distance, I checked under the stalls but couldn't see any feet. One stall had its door shut, so I peeked through the crack and saw something in the back. When I looked under the door, I couldn't see anything. I looked through the crack again and saw someone's face on the other side. Startled, I ran to the door and slammed it shut, locking it with the key from my desk. I informed another nurse about the situation, but when we checked together, the lights were working and both stalls were empty. It was impossible for someone to have left the room and locked the door. That evening before my shift ended, I attempted to inquire Abitha about the contents of the bathroom, but she refused to respond. Just as I surrendered and headed towards the exit wearing my jacket, I overheard her uttering, "Merry Christmas." I turned around and witnessed her smiling at me. However, that smile didn't evoke a pleasant sensation within me. There was something disconcerting about it. I had no choice but to turn away and depart. I had to continue working with Abitha for a few more weeks until she was relocated to another hospice center. Even now, I still sense a connection between Abitha and whatever I witnessed in that bathroom. It's one of those stories that I simply cannot comprehend or rationalize, yet it continues to haunt me. In 2016, I returned to Pennsylvania from California for Christmas break during college. It was strange transitioning from an independent college student in a warm climate to living in my childhood bedroom in a state that experiences a true winter. However, I didn't mind the cost of the flight because I wanted to spend the holidays with my parents. My bedroom was on the second floor, directly above the sliding door that led to the backyard. Whenever someone opened or closed the heavy door, it would shake my room. The house was built in the 1950s, so it had its fair share of creaks and groans, but it was sturdy. I should mention that the town my parents lived in was safe with a low crime rate, unlike nearby Philadelphia. They rarely received intrusive calls, mostly from magazine salespeople or Jehovah's Witnesses who stopped calling after my dad debated scripture with them. Throughout my freshman year of college, I developed a bad smoking habit. So when my parents went to bed, I would stay up late playing games on my laptop next to my open bedroom window, smoking and drinking scotch that I took from my dad's liquor cabinet. I would keep my window open for anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours after midnight. Depending on the weather and my level of tiredness, I usually air out the room before using air fresheners to get rid of the tobacco smell. To avoid waking my parents, I use headphones when watching TV or listening to music, but I only use one earphone so I can still hear if someone is approaching. One night, while playing an online game, the house alarm suddenly went off, scaring me. Everyone in the house woke up and prepared for whatever was happening. My main concern at that moment wasn't a potential home invasion, but rather the fear of my parents finding out that I had been smoking and taking their alcohol. Being underage at the time and knowing my parents' strictness, I anticipated a lot of drama if they discovered my actions. However, when my dad checked on me, he didn't seem to notice any smell. I'm not sure if he was too tired and focused on the alarm, or if he noticed but didn't care. Regardless, he instructed me to stay with my mom in their bedroom until he gave us the all clear, while my dad went downstairs, presumably armed with a pistol, to search the house and check the surroundings, including the front and back yards, for any potential intruders. He returns and informs my mom and me that he couldn't find anything, and it was likely a false alarm. We all go back to bed, well, they do. I, on the other hand, return to playing Civ 6 and being a diplomatic genius. After about an hour, feeling tired, I get up to close my bedroom window before going to bed, but then the alarm goes off again. My dad goes downstairs to check the ground floor and the yards, only to come back and assure me that it was probably just the wind. Given the windy night, it made sense that the breeze could have triggered the alarm by rattling the doors or windows. So neither my dad nor I were concerned about it. The next morning, my dad is reviewing the alarm system's app on his iPhone and discovers that the backsliding doors were opened 14 times during the night. I was impressed by the system's capabilities, but puzzled as to how the doors could have been opened so many times. Shortly after, there's a knock on our front door, and it turns out to be our neighbor from down the street. The man asked us if we had any intruders the previous night, and we replied that we didn't think so. However, he then informed us that he had caught someone on his security camera attempting to break into his house. This person had tried to pick a lock and even looked directly into the camera before getting scared and leaving. We realized that this intruder must have moved on to our house when he realized it was an easier target. This revelation really scared me because while I was inside playing games and drinking stolen scotch, there was someone trying to break in just a few feet below me. If I had looked out the window, I would have made eye contact with him. He must have smelled my cigarette smoke and known someone was home, but it didn't deter him. He was ready to confront someone, except when he saw my dad with his gun searching the house and yard in the dark. I used to enjoy scary stories and horror movies, but I never found human villains to be that frightening. However, after that night, my perspective changed. I realized how truly evil and predatory humans can be. That guy had been lurking in our backyard for hours, right under my nose, and I had no idea. It's baffling how he managed to vanish when the alarm went off, and then had the audacity to return once we had all gone back to bed. It's like he was a ghost, disappearing into the darkness. It's unsettling to think about it. My dad had checked the backyard, making sure there was no one hiding in the dark corners under the trees. But there was. My dad was being watched by someone, observing him as he walked around in his slippers or whatever he was wearing. This person waited for him to stop searching before sneaking back towards the house. The thought of it still gives me chills. And now that I'm back in Cali writing this, I always ensure that all the windows and doors in my dorm are locked. I also double or triple check whenever I sense something negative might happen. It's because you never truly know if someone is lurking in the shadows until it's too late.